Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Nishant, and you are listening to my show, The Nishant Garg Show. This show is about extracting information on mindfulness, personal development, and spirituality. I am on a mission to spread mindfulness, and I would love for you to join me in this movement. My today's guest is Celia Landman. She is an experienced mindfulness facilitator and practitioner. She holds a Master of Mindfulness Studies degree from Lesley University with a focus on contemplative neuroscience, mindful communication, and mindfulness in education. A published author on mindfulness, Celia currently leads meditation groups for teens and adults and develops personalized mindfulness programs to support individuals in all stages of life. Celia, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nishant. I'm happy to be here with you.
That's great. And it's been my pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm really looking forward to create mindfulness practices and so many new things from this call so that people can learn so many new things and apply in their personal and professional life. And Celia, how would you describe, or how would your family describe, what do you do?
Well, my family is a little vague sometimes. They say I'm a mindfulness counselor. They say I teach people to breathe, that my children might say that I just try to make people calm down. So what I do right now is I work in two places. I work with in a naturopath's office doing one-on-one meetings and creating practices to support individuals. So I work mostly with adults there. I also do small groups. And then I work in a teen rehab that treats, right now I'm working with girls, that treats mental health issues, eating disorders, addictions, generalized fear and anxiety, depression. So I'm working with a range, and I work in small groups there and one-on-one. So I have two different windows into being with people.
Okay. And when did you get into this mindfulness profession?
Yeah. Well, the profession part that's a more difficult world to be in, I think, because it is emerging. And I have a degree from Lesley. I went to Lesley University and did the Mindfulness Studies program. So I have a master's in Mindfulness Studies, but it's not a pre-professional degree. So I can't really use that to go and say, so I'm a mindfulness educator. And people just don't know what to do with that. So usually people who have some kind of psychology degree or a teaching degree, it would dovetail with that and work into their existing profession. So to have this as a full life, it's like an umbrella over my whole life, that it's a really new path. And I got it's an extrapolation of my own practice. So I started practicing meditation over 20 years ago, but the path I'm on now, mindfulness in general, I started maybe, I'm going to say about 16 years ago, something like that.
So you started meditation 20 years ago and mindfulness 16 years ago. I'm curious to understand, what is the difference between mindfulness and meditation?
So I think of mindfulness as this really big container. So mindfulness is the process of how we do things, how we look at a thought, how we look at our actions. It's that little bit of separation where we hold it with a greater awareness. So that's our metacognition. And meditation, I see as the mindfulness delivery system. So we can have thousands of mindfulness delivery systems, meditation being one, or dishwashing being one, caring for a child being one. So it's not limited. Mindfulness doesn't limit us in expression. So mindfulness is really the process, and I'd say meditation is one of the activities that we can do in mindfulness.
Mindfulness is a process. Is that what you're saying? And meditation is one of the activities or a practice in that mindfulness process or umbrella.
Yes.
And mindfulness can have any number of activities.
Yeah.
And meditation is one of that. Yeah, please.
I like to call them the mindfulness delivery systems, because we all like, if we're thinking about things in systems, then that's just one door into mindfulness. There are many doors, and my practice is based in a Buddhist tradition too. So the Buddhists said there are 84,000 Dharma doors. So which just means a lot. There's a lot of things we can do in mindfulness. We don't have to keep it on the cushion.
So you just mentioned that 84,000 Dharma doors. Can you elaborate more on that, please?
Yeah. So the Dharma in this context is the truth, the way. It's the path the Buddha set out so we can live a beautiful life. So we know how to take care of ourselves. We know how to take care of others. We know how to live on the planet without so much confusion and suffering. And there are 84,000 opportunities, 84,000 ways to access this. So in the Buddhist practice, the Buddhist thought world, there's all kinds of different options available to us. So some people, even in the Buddhist times, he talked about different practices that we use. Some people use loving kindness meditation. Some people use breath concentration. Some people do walking meditation. And they're all beautiful ways to access what's true in us, that place of stillness in us, the place where we have capacity to hold what's going on in our lives. Is that clear, or do you?
Yeah. So yes,
curious.
It makes a lot of sense to me. So, do you have any favorite meditation practice that you do on your own?
So one thing I do, which is really simple, and it's something I teach people right away, is, and it comes from the tradition I practice in, which is the Plum Village tradition. So in that tradition, we practice stopping, and you can stop with the support of an app on your phone. I put a timer on my computer, so when I write, I have a little bell that rings every 20 to 30 minutes. And when that bell rings, or when I know that this is the time I'm practicing stopping, I use 3 breaths. And with the first breath, I breathe in, and as I exhale, I release the tension from my body, the physical tension. So I let my shoulders drop, and I I'm one of the people who carry a lot of stress in the back of my neck and in my shoulders. And we understand that the body and the mind work together. And it's impossible to have a serene, happy mind in a body that's holding lots of stress and tension. So with that first breath, it's acknowledging the body and exhaling whatever I can. And I imagine it flowing out through my feet into the earth that can hold everything. Then with the second breath, I check in with my emotions and just see what's there. Usually there's not one thing, there's unease or happiness, excitement. There's a lot of things usually. And I don't get rid of them. I just let them know I understand. There's good reasons you're here. As I exhale, I let them know there's space for all of them. And with the third breath, I inhale and I say silently here. And as I exhale, I say now. So I remind myself that this is it. This is me on this planet in this moment with whatever's happening. And I'm here. I'm here for this. So it's a super simple practice of acknowledging the body in the first breath, releasing tension, acknowledging emotions in the second breath, letting them know, of course, I understand. And the third is here now as we breathe in and out, and putting that into our day, practicing with that, it gives us this kind of permission to be as we are, to stop so much striving and losing ourselves in our work, losing ourselves in our projects, and just pushing through. I think that's a habit for a lot of us, is to just push through.
Yes.
Until, and this is my meditation time. This is my practice time. So when we do little, like taking little sips of mindfulness through the day, we integrate. And it's like pouring out stress from this container. So it actually increases our capacity to be with what's arising. And I tell people, it's not going to make your life perfect. It's not going to make things super easy. But what it does is it gives us the space to be present for what isn't easy.
Yes, and accepting all the emotions, positive, negative emotions, or any thought process that we are having inside our mind and body. And this mindfulness practice of taking a pause and breathing 3 breaths, we are stopping whatever is going on in the world outside of us, and we can tap into our body through that process. It's a process to get into the power of now.
Yeah, and the body really responds to being noticed, and the emotions really want us to know. That's information. We tend to be very judgmental with our emotions. We like, oh, compassion, that's the good one. Oh, judgment, aversion, oh, bad. And we discriminate with these emotions. But when we can just see them and go, oh yeah, there's good reasons that's here. That wants me to know something. So we take out some of the sting and the stigma of having this full range of emotions, and we can be much more balanced too. So, and one of the ways I approach even emotion is working with the body, because each emotion shows up in our body. We feel things in the body, and it's usually in that kind of range. We have that the vagus nerve, so that runs through the face, the throat, the chest, the belly, and that's really where our feelings are happening. We don't feel stuff like we don't feel anxiety in our ankle or fear in our, in my thumb.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you, I'm very interested to know this. How do you personally deal with stressful situations?
Well, and we're living in a time, as we're talking right now, we're in this global pandemic where there's lots of stress, and I'm seeing it in my family, I'm seeing it in my community. What supports me, I do a couple of things. One is really seeing how impersonal this whole thing is. And the more I'm able to get myself, the I, me, mine part of myself out of the picture, I can just see things more clearly. So I don't have to respond from a place of personal affront and victimization. I can really come from a place where I see that we have this teaching in Buddhism that I really value, and it's called the 3 characteristics or the 3 marks of existence, and they're anicca, anatta, and dukkha. And anicca's impermanence, anatta is non-self. So knowing that this life, this body, exists because of causes and conditions, that it is not, it's that living, that even this life is process. It's something that happens. It's not a fixed entity. And then dukkha is suffering of being.
So, not to interrupt you here. So you said dukkha, right?
Right.
And I think it's a Sanskrit word, dukkha, and suffering. Yeah. Suffering is. Yeah. So can you please elaborate on nisha or nicha?
Anicca is permanence. So these are in the Pali language, which is really close to the Sanskrit, and I think they're probably the same in the Sanskrit. So anicca is the impermanence. So we know, look at how life is. We started as a single cell. We are so impermanent. Everything's impermanent. So this is a big component of mindfulness, that we know it all changes. Everything changes. And it's this understanding of change and the understanding of the dukkha, the suffering. We hold on to stuff. We want it to be, we want what isn't possible. We want a fixed world. I want to know what's going to happen. I want to know what's going to happen with this virus. I want it to be like it was. And because of being in these vulnerable bodies that are not, that just exist because of the conditions that support us. Because none of us created our own selves. We come through these lineages of generations. We come through our ancestors. We're supported by the oxygen on this planet, by the water, by the sun. We don't exist independently. So when we touch into that, we see that, this idea of a lifespan, that we're dependent on the supportive conditions, and when they don't exist anymore, things will change. So one teacher said about these 3 characteristics, he said, everything keeps changing, it'll shake you up, and it's not personal.
Who is that teacher?
I wish I knew. It came to me maybe third-handed, so I don't know, but I think that's, it really sums things up beautifully, because, stuff keeps changing and we all get shook up. And that's the dukkha. That's the suffering of living in vulnerable bodies in a place where everything keeps changing. And we see this right now very clearly.
Yeah. And suffering is everywhere. And sometimes we can control that, sometimes we cannot. I was reading this book called The Art of Happiness, and it's from
Mm-hmm.
Dalai Lama. Somebody asked Dalai Lama, uh, how can we how can we stay strong in suffering? And I remember that his response was, suffering is going to come, and suffering is an opportunity to grow from that. And whenever anger, suffering is coming to our door, we should treat them as a guest. And I
Yeah.
think it came from Thich Nhat Hanh that we should invite all these sufferings as a guest because they are coming to teach us something.
Yeah. It reminds me of the poem by Rumi, The Guest House, where he says, invite them all in, even if they crowd your house with sorrows, because each one has, I think it says, it's a guest from beyond.
Yeah, and people who are listening,
Yeah.
Rumi Jalaluddin is a 13th century Persian poet, and he had so many amazing poetries about life, spirituality, happiness, and much more.
Yeah. Yeah. He had his eyes wide open. He was awake. I really believe that. And in response to the idea of suffering, even, and I've had this experience where, and this is part of my practice, is meeting everything with the intention to care, the intention of gentleness and compassionate care. So meeting my own suffering and being able to just hold my suffering and saying, oh, yeah, this hurts. Of course, I don't want this. And I care about this. And when I do that, there's this kind of subtle joy, this happiness that I can actually show up for myself and not abandon myself in the suffering. And it's really amazing when it happens.
Yes. Um, People who have mindfulness practices, they can understand, they are aware, and they can deal with all these stressful situations. I want to understand how people can learn, how people can, embrace their sufferings and grief who do not understand or who do not have mindfulness practices. Would you recommend, or what can you recommend, any advice to somebody who is not into this mindfulness game or
Yeah.
practice?
I really like the mindful self-compassion practices that Kristen Neff and Chris Germer started. Kristen Neff wrote a book called Self-Compassion that has some really beautiful insights and basic practices of how to start just standing close to. And that, I think, for me, uh, one thing I learned before I actually began doing more self-compassion practice was to even noticing how I am. So that pause I was talking about, that 3 breaths, that's essential information. How am I right now? And when we look, how am I? We've automatically decoupled from the pain circuitry. So when I am my sadness, my depression, my anxiety, and I'm with it in that, in my body and my mind, there's no separation. But when I look, I've already witnessing what is from a place that isn't that. So it's the mind that knows the suffering isn't suffering. It's just that observation, that little space that can witness it with, oh, that's what's true. And it's removing this judgment. It's getting beyond right and wrong. It's going, this is true for me now. Yeah. Okay. And sometimes even that is relief.
This is very powerful. And I think our mind is designed for survival. And when we are in a painful, suffering state, we can take a pause to really check in. How am I? How am I feeling? We can name it in any way, the way we want. And we can, and one of the strong practices for me is gratitude journal and a free flow journal where I can write anything what is happening in my mind and body so that I can think in a better way. Now, if I'm having so many thoughts in my head, I'm going nuts. My anxiety level is going high. So, and it's a free flow journal for me. And then a gratitude journal where I remind myself that what do I have right? What do I have now? Instead of focusing on what I don't have.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I think what you're pointing to is permission to just include it all, not to get rid of anything. Because the minute I look at something and I go, yeah, that is not meeting my standards of mindfulness, that's not meeting my expectation for myself. I've already stepped outside of that space of acceptance. So when we open and we go, oh yeah, there's jealousy happening, or there's impatience, without making it a self-improvement project. Because I think we can do a lot of violence to ourselves with all these self-improvement. I love the quote from Suzuki Roshi. He said, everyone is perfect as they are, and we all can use a little improvement. But it's remembering that, oh yeah, that our nature is awakened. Our true nature is love and light. And that it's just removing everything that's getting in the way. So it's not about fixing. It's about opening. I see it. I see the energy of it. The results might look the same, but the energy of doing it is 180 degrees different.
yes. And mindfulness is not a project to fix yourself. And this is very profound. You just mentioned that. It's about opening ourselves to the possibilities and removing the obstacles that is getting in our way and being enlightened. So we have so many layers, past conditioning, programming, since we were born. And take, it's going to take time to uncover those layers and conditioning. And mindfulness practices, and one of them is meditation, loving kindness meditation, breathing, or any other kind of meditation or self-compassion practice will help us, getting into our body, because what is happening in the world, we cannot change that. And Celia, I want to understand, how can we cultivate compassion for ourselves? Because I've seen people, they are very compassionate towards others, but they are not compassionate towards themselves.
Yeah.
So, how can we cultivate self compassion in our day to day life, and why?
Yeah. It's, well, we know that for a lot of people, it is easier to see the goodness in others. And the population I work with, the teens, especially the kids who are addicts, I do lessons on forgiveness, on forgiving ourselves. And I start by asking them, how do you have compassion for yourself? How do you feel about, being kind to yourself and forgiving yourself? And most of the kids say, that's a bad idea to forgive myself. I can forgive other people, but not me, because I'm an addict. And So we start with this idea. A lot of people have this idea that we need that critical voice to keep us good. That the more I judge and condemn myself, the safer I'll be. When in fact, it's the opposite, because we don't respond, we don't learn. We're much more motivated to be true and kind to ourselves than we are to not do things out of fear, and punishment and shame. So what we work with is forgiving ourselves unconditionally and really opening up this whole idea of guilt and shame, because I see that as the biggest obstacle to loving ourselves, that we think we're unworthy and that we're unredeemable.
Yeah. Unforgiveness is getting in our way to love ourselves. If we cannot love ourselves, we cannot love others. And if we are not compassionate toward us, we cannot be compassionate towards others. And this forgiveness, the whole thing of forgiveness is not easy, actually. This is very tough. And it took me so much time to really understand how to forgive myself, how to forgive others. And this is a spiritual power to forgive us and forgive somebody else. What practice would you recommend to somebody to forgive?
So there's a basic Buddhist practice, but I've kind of changed it a little and elaborated. And I give this to my teens I work with, and it's so the first step is starting, and I did this every day for 3 years because I needed so much forgiveness for my life, for the things that had happened and the way I thought about myself. So I begin with forgiveness for this body, for not being perfect, for breaking, for getting sick, for getting old, for ultimately failing. Yeah, for ultimately this body, can't support us forever. So just forgiving the body for all the aches and pains and suffering in a body. And then the second one is to ask the body to forgive me for not caring for it. So all the ways I've not listened, when I was tired, when I was hungry, when I was, the body wanted to rest and I said no, or, the body wanted to move and I said, no, we're doing this, or all the ways we ignore this body and don't care for it with the way we should. And also asking the body to entrust itself to us, to be willing to trust us, to care for it. And then I offer forgiveness for all the ways I will hurt myself today, knowingly or unknowingly, through my thoughts, through my actions, and through my words. And I forgive myself for holding on to the idea that I'm responsible for other people's mental formations, that I'm responsible for their thoughts. And knowing that I can make mistakes and I'm still worthy of my own love. And then I forgive. Let's see, where am I in my forgiveness? Because it's multi-steps, yeah. And then I forgive to the extent I'm able. I forgive others for the harm they will cause me intentionally or unintentionally today. Only when I'm ready. We have a big talk about this before, because forgiving others is something we absolutely do for ourselves. It's not done to please anybody. And we fully have to understand how deeply we've been hurt. And also with these kids, especially because I work with people who've come through trauma, forgiveness also doesn't mean that we trust. We can forgive somebody and really set safe boundaries for ourselves. We can forgive somebody and not have them in our lives. So to the extent we're able, we forgive other people and allow them to be free from perfection. And I use this phrase that when we forgive ourselves, we release ourselves from this prison of perfection, because it is a prison.
Yes, this is very deep, and forgiveness doesn't mean that we are putting up somebody's shit on ourselves. It just simply means that I don't receive your gift, whatever you're offering to me.
Yeah.
It's like Dalai Lama mentioned that if somebody is offering you anger, refuse to accept their gift. And when we are forgiving somebody else, it's not about them, it is about us. And when we are forgiving, we are opening that stream of flow and we are removing the obstacles. And if somebody is not able to forgive another person, it means deep down we are not able to forgive ourselves. If we can forgive ourselves first, then it becomes a lot easier to forgive others. It is along the lines of self-compassion. If we are compassionate towards us, then it is a lot easier to be compassionate towards somebody else. I think everything starts from us, from self-love. If we have self-love, then we can love somebody else.
And when we're talking, the population I work with coming through abuse, when we're talking about abuse and forgiveness, it is extremely important for us to know that we need to understand the pain that has been done, the full extent of the damage that's been done to us before offering forgiveness. And forgiveness is only when we have really been with our suffering around this issue. It's not, it's when we no longer want to carry the hatred and blame. And it's understanding, it's opening to understanding some of that backstory of the other person, that their causes and conditions. But it's also, it has no timetable. And I really encourage people not to even step into that idea of forgiving the perpetrator. I mean, until it's the work has been done for themselves, because it's really an empowering thing when we do forgive, and the work of understanding our own pain, our own trauma comes as the groundwork first.
Yep. And in your mindfulness sessions with individuals and in groups, I want to understand that what is the main struggle people feel in forgiving somebody?
In forgiving others or forgiving themselves?
Forgiving others and forgiving ourselves, in both cases.
Well, I think people really struggle. It's funny because some kids say just like, no, I don't want to forgive. It's like just forgiveness in general is a bad idea. I find that people, it really depends who I'm with. Older people seem to have more ability to forgive others and really withhold forgiveness from themselves because of this idea of I should be like this. I made a, it's forgiving ourselves for mistakes, for the way we were unskillful, the way we hurt somebody accidentally. I see that a lot with the kids. They have a lot of trouble forgiving themselves too. And it's because they don't believe that they're their lives are worth anything, that they really have diminished sense of value and connection. They don't see they don't see the goodness in themselves. And they're more willing to forgive others because they see other people usually as more important, I think, than their own life.
Yeah. I want to understand this case. Do you remember in your experience that if any older person, doesn't matter in any age, was very reluctant to forgive somebody, and how did you navigate through the process of unforgiving to forgiveness?
So I let this happen as it happens. I mean, we start where we are, and we start by forgiving the place that's angry. No, we just start with forgiving that. And the forgiveness for the other person may or may not happen, but that's really, that's like the bud that opens at the end. And if that piece doesn't fully happen, it's not, we don't want to force it. Like pulling the chrysalis off the butterfly. All the stuff that's there needs attention. The pain, the resistance. We start where we are. We just forgive, the rage. We forgive whatever's there because that is what's calling to us now. And forgiveness can take years. Forgiveness can take a lifetime. It's not a race. And that's not the end. The forgiveness of others really isn't the goal. It's to be with our own pain, our own hurt, to get to the place where we can even see the connection to others.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. If you are just joining us, you are listening to this podcast with Celia Landman. Yes, and forgiveness may not happen in a moment. It may take days, weeks, months, and sometimes years if the pain is very deep and if the suffering has been coming from the past. It will take time, and that's when we get to be patient with ourselves. We get to be patient with our process. We are not doing all this mindfulness work to fix ourselves. We are creating new possibilities in our life by having all these mindfulness practices.
Yeah, so I have this story that I had a teenage person come to me because there was a lot of suffering in her family. And my friend, who was friends with the family, she said, maybe you can talk to them because the situation was that the dad had been physically abusive. And he had been physically abusive with the mom and this teenage girl. And the mom wanted to reconnect with the dad because they had gone through some of their own work together. And she really wanted to bring him back into their lives and in the house. And the daughter was having a lot of difficulty accepting him back and wouldn't speak to him. And when I had the opportunity to talk to her, I said, tell me, what's going on? And she said, everybody's pressuring me to forgive my father. Everyone wants it to be like nothing ever happened, and I can't do it. And my advice for her was that, yeah, you can't do it because that's not what's true for you. Something happened. And the process she needed to work with her own feelings of, that loss of trust and feeling so deeply hurt because her father had hit her. And she needed to do all that before forgiveness. So they wanted me to kind of talk her into forgiving her father. And that was the last thing. I wanted to do for this girl, because she was, that would be another level of dishonesty for her, because what was happening in her was so needed so much care, needs so much attending to, and she needed to really heal that part to be able to trust and to even know how to take care of herself. Kids need protection. It's kids forgiving and adults forgiving. It's two different things too, because as adults, we can set these clear boundaries. We can say, well, I don't want you in my life because you're not safe for me to be around. With a kid, they really can't do that. So it's even more important that she's supported by people around her. So, forgiveness is really can be very complex.
And when we just saying somebody that forgive another person or forgive yourself, it's not going to happen just simply like that. And in this story you just mentioned, you were showing empathy towards her, that we are with you. It's okay to feel that. It's okay to accept. We get to accept whatever we are feeling, whatever pain and suffering we are going through. We need to embrace that feeling first, and then when we feel that, and then we can learn to release. And forgiveness is nothing but a process to release that resentment that we are holding on to for ourselves or for somebody. Resentment is like drinking poison, assuming that or thinking that somebody, if somebody drinks poison and die.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also something else that needs to be said is that when we practice self-compassion, when we practice forgiveness, it is not an agreement to accept abuse. It is not saying we don't take care of ourselves, we don't set boundaries. We, in self-compassion, we care deeply about how we are and how our life is and what is okay for me. And that's what I tell these kids too, is, there's so much pressure to be approved of, and not just for kids, but all of us. There's so much pressure to be, to get all those likes and to be someone of value. That practice is very counterculture, because we turn our eyes inward and say, instead of, am I okay for you? Is this okay for me? Is this okay for me? And when I check, is it safe for me? Is this a place I want to stay? I want to be. Are these friends okay for me? Is this work feeding me? Not just giving me money, but is this work that supports my values? When I keep checking, is this okay for me? It just flips the narrative, and we look at our lives a little differently.
Yeah, and with this statement, we are changing the story that we are creating in our head. And this reminds me of Tara Brach saying that the power of saying yes to everything. It does not mean that we are accepting the abuse, or we are letting people do whatever they want to do in our life. It's not about that. It's about saying yes to whatever universe is bringing into our life, and learning from that and embracing that, so that we can do something about it. And coming back to Dalai Lama saying that every suffering, every pain is an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, and it's meeting those things with wisdom. It's meeting them with discernment. It's not, it's, as my teacher says, Joanne Friday, she's a Dharma teacher in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. She says, it's not being a limp noodle. We don't just lose our whole, common sense. That we know, yet we have this ultimate reality where we are all interconnected and we are all part of each other, but we also have this historical reality where, stuff happens.
So you just mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh. People who don't know about Thich Nhat Hanh, can you please elaborate more on him?
Sure. So Thich Nhat Hanh was a Buddhist monk in Vietnam who was very active during the Vietnamese War, and he came to the U.S. to speak out about ending the war, to speak to the UN, and he was barred. He was exiled while he was in the U.S., so he couldn't return home to Vietnam. And he is responsible for bringing this beautiful practice of engaged Buddhism into the world. So he has set up a big monastery in Bordeaux, France, called Plum Village. And then there's other satellite monasteries in the U.S. And he's brought this practice of the Vietnamese Zen lineage and really infused it with ways to practice in the world. And especially for those people who are activists, who are really connected to engaging in protecting the planet, in civil rights, in honoring all life. So he shows us how to do it without anger, without resentment, and with, most importantly, being peace in ourselves. Because if we bring violence and aggression into our thought pattern, into this judging, if we get caught in the right and the wrong of it, and we get all righteous around things, we are part of the violence. We're part of the problem. So it's this way of being that can be the foundation for change in a different way.
Yeah, and violence in the external world is definitely an indication of violence inside our body, or something is happening in our body. If we are not peace with ourselves, we may not be at peace in the external world. And it's inner being. And I think it's in this world, in this culture and society, we are running in the external world, we are running towards materialistic things and focusing more on the outer side. And basically, if it is more to work on the inner side. And Thich Nhat Hanh practice is more on the engagement side. So can you please elaborate some practices that he offers to engage with people with peace and calm?
Well, all the practices that we do are really practices that we start with ourselves, just as you were saying, Nishant, that and he's quoted as saying, peace in myself, peace in the world. So it's really the quality of our consciousness that we bring to the world. One of his, or perhaps his greatest gift to the world, is establishing community. So in Sanskrit, it's called Sangha. And Sangha, yes. So we have these worldwide Sanghas where people come together and we do practices for connection as well. So in our Sangha, in our practice group, we have something called Dharma sharing, which is where we actually practice mindful speech and deep listening, and we learn to have space for others' suffering. We learn how to let people hold their own suffering without us having to give advice or fix or respond. So we trust them with their difficulties and we trust their process, but we also give this space where people can share this. So it's like Thich Nhat Hanh talks about how our suffering, when we are so burdened by suffering, we can fall into despair. And the Sangha, this group of community of spiritual friends, is the raft that can support us in these times when we're so full of suffering. So even just having people listen, and it's an amazing gift to have people just listen. I don't know if you've experienced that.
Yeah, listening is not easy. Active listening is not easy. It doesn't come naturally to me, and I practice it every single time because we want to listen from our own experience. We get to listen from somebody's experience by putting ourselves in their own shoes, and then we can really understand their pain, and that's where empathy plays a very big role.
Well, I can feel how engaged and how you're listening, how beautifully you're listening right now. So I might argue with you about your dismissal of your listening skills. But so there's a few guidelines that we offer to keep the practice safe for in these groups. And one of the most wonderful ones is double confidentiality, where after we share, we ask the other person, would it be okay if I speak to you about what you shared? And then they can say no, because we just leave it. We just want to speak it. We don't want anyone to give us this, people think they're helping when they give advice or they give solutions, or they, tell us about their friend who had the same thing happen to them. And it takes something from our own experience. So we have that confidentiality and the confidentiality that's not shared outside the group. But one of the things that I've learned is and this comes from a teacher in the Insight tradition, Donald Rothberg, who talks about 50-50 listening. So he doesn't mean, you space out 50% of the time. He means that when we listen, we also listen to our own reactivity. And we also pay attention to the breath in the body, to the muscular tension in the body. And we just stay with, again, that question, what's going on? What's going on in me? How is this for me right now? And when I find myself getting a little reactive, when I find myself, getting that little friction of like, you shouldn't have done that. Or why did you say that? Or, I would, whatever comes up. Oh, that needs some attention. I breathe with that. So I can open to that space of being with the other person. And another thing that I've learned is to imagine the words that I'm speaking, the words that the other person's saying. Just imagine I'm doing that. And that shifts a lot.
And in that breathing process, we can get into our body and really feel and tell our mind that we need to listen, we need to actively listen this person. And in that breathing process, we can release our own story that we are creating. Because our responsibility in that conversation is to understand that person's feeling from where they're coming from, not to attach our own feelings and our story with that, because it is about them, not about us.
Yeah, and when I breathe like that, then I can remind myself, just listening, just because we all need that reminder, because we are trained in life to always have a response, to have an opinion, to say something brilliant. We put a lot of stock in our communication and how much we add to things. This is not about adding. So it really involves some unconditioning, some loosening up of all the stuff we think we should do.
Yes. And this saying from Thich Nhat Hanh reminds me that happiness is a way. There is no way to happiness. I think I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
I think he's saying that there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. The more we are trying to find happiness in the outside world, we are never going to find that. It's already inside of us. We do not have to seek somewhere. And when we remove those obstacles to the happiness, we find happiness. And when we find happiness, we may not have any name for that. What we experience in the outer world is a thrill. It's an excitement. That is not a happiness. Happiness, we can only experience happiness. We may not be able to name that happiness. So I would like to ask you that how can we cultivate happiness? Again, how can we remove the obstacles to the happiness?
Well, and there's a practice for that too. I mean, there are practices for everything. So one of the things I just did this with my kids in rehab last week, was there's a practice called 10 breaths for happiness. And I am trying to think of who wrote, there's a very thin little book that about this, and I'm going to try to remember who wrote it. Let me see if I can pull it up, but maybe I can pull it up after and let you know.
Yeah.
So what it is based on is that we have this, and I'm pretty sure you've heard about this, Nishant, is that this negativity bias. So we have this.
I have not actually.
Oh,
please explain.
Yeah. So here it is. So it's a book by Glenn Schneider, and he's in the Plum Village tradition too. And but it's important to know about this this negativity bias. So human beings, as we evolved, we are excellent at threat detection. So we lived communally, tribally for thousands and thousands of years. And it is much more important for us to know where the poison berries are than for us to know, where the beautiful irises are blooming. Because one of the poison berries are going to endanger our gene line. They're going to endanger our lives. And so we hold on to that. So neuroscience tells us, and Dr. Rick Hanson's done a lot of research with this. We hold on to the negative about 5 times more than the positive. So, for example, if we have a dog bite us, that stays with us much, much more than if we've had a happy encounter. We had a happy dog meeting. And it takes 5 contacts with a dog or another dog to even kind of erase that. So it's like a path in the woods where brush has grown up. It's not gone because it's still there, but we need a lot of positive interactions to counteract a negative one. So I tell my husband when he does something, unskillful, that, okay, now I need 5 good things from you. So we can be kind of even here. Sometimes that works. So we're super, super attenuated to what will hurt us. So we remember every harsh word. We remember the pain so much more than the good stuff. So does that sound familiar?
Yeah, now it sounds very familiar, because I think, I'm not sure if it is me or just human beings, that we focus on all the negative things, and we are always focusing on what we don't have rather than focusing on what we have. And that's where the practice of gratitude, and gratitude practice can be anytime. It doesn't have to be so many big things. It can be along the lines of drinking coffee if you're enjoying that, and focusing on the positive side. And this is very clear to me. So since you mentioned about your husband, that you do all this positive thing, but it doesn't work all the time. So how can you practice non-attachment? Because I'm reading a lot of things on non-attachment / detachment from the things, from human beings, and this is very, very tough. And the attachment is always there unconsciously. So how can we practice conscious detachment from the outcome, from human beings, from things?
So that
in Buddhism,
stepping into something I practice with a lot, which is equanimity. But I just want to circle back to give you that practice for the 10 breaths. It is a lot. It is similar to gratitude practice, but it's even a little more codified. It's even a little more of a formal, I guess you might say. So what it is it takes approximately about 20 seconds. I mean, I've heard different numbers, but somewhere around there, to create a neural pathway. So when we can actively stop, you were mentioning drinking a cup of tea, or just enjoying whatever we're enjoying. Say we get a positive email from a friend, saying they appreciate something we did, that we, instead of like rolling over it, like, oh yeah, that is supposed to be that way. Let's see, where's the obstacle? Where's the obstacle here? Which is how we roll as a species. And I see this myself I've gotten 2 emails the same day. One saying, I love that group you facilitated. It was so lovely. I'm going to bring a friend. Another said, it just wasn't for me. I won't be back. Guess which one I focused on? Yeah. And I'm looking at going, I know what I'm doing. Like, it's very clear to me. I wasn't taking in the positive, but boy, could I make space for that one that, that confirmed all that stuff about me, that, oh yeah, something's wrong. So this practice of 10 breaths actively rewires the brain. It actively creates these neural pathways. So when we find something positive, we stop, we relax the body, we soften the body, we look at whatever or feel, we tap in with all our senses. So how's my body right now? What's the texture in my body? What's the color I'm looking at? Is there a scent in the room? How does it feel to be with this good thing? And we pause for about 10 breaths. So that creates this neural pathway of happiness. And then we try to do this during the day.
I'm not to interrupt you here. Can we do those 10 breaths right now?
I would love it. So
if you can give a demo, please.
Yeah. So, and I'll do some guiding. So
please.
Wherever you are, it works beautifully with finding something in your environment. And if you can't find anything in your environment, I would suggest just a very recent memory, not a long-term memory. So in my space, I have 2 daffodils that are on my little meditation altar that I'm going to enjoy. So, do you have something, Nishant, in your space, that even a color that you enjoy, or looking
I
at
have the painting of Buddha in my room right now.
Yeah. So something that makes us happy. So just pausing and allowing the whole body to soften. So really giving ourselves permission to open to what is pleasant, to open to something that brings us some ease, some joy, that connects us to something beautiful. And seeing how is the body responding to being with pleasant? And what are the sounds around us? Is there anything we notice in our environment? Really seeing, really being with, and just noticing the body breathing with this. Letting it come into every cell of this body. And just letting it into your heart. Letting it right into your heart space. Letting the beauty speak to what is true for you. And just taking one more inhale, one more exhale. And there, you've just created a neural connection to happiness. How was that?
That was awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And happiness is free. I
Yeah.
feel that there are books galore on happiness, and sometimes we just get to tap into the breathing process to really understand happiness. And since we have talked a lot about suffering and pain, I remember this saying from Anthony de Mello. Have you heard of Anthony de Mello?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Anthony de Mello. So he always mentioned that there are two sides of a pendulum. So if we are on one side of the pendulum, we will go to another side. And one side is suffering and another side is happiness. When we are suffering in our life, it's not going to last forever. We will find happiness soon. Just be patient with that process. It's an opportunity for learning. It's an opportunity for growth. And embrace that. Seek support from people. Find some positivity. Do not neglect yourself. Be compassionate towards yourself. Be kind towards yourself. Life is happening for you. I digressed.
Well, and Thich Nhat Hanh says, to be with suffering, we need to be with joy in order to have the capacity to be with suffering. So those two things have to be, and you're absolutely right. Those two things have to be both there, because if our lives are just suffering, we're not any good to anybody, including ourselves, because we're just caught in that pain. So really knowing that, even in the midst of all this stuff, that it's possible. And it's sometimes, the hardest thing is giving ourselves the permission to enjoy something when others around us are suffering. But it's nourishment. It's food, so we can show up for them and for ourselves, with some hopefulness and some a little buoyancy. We all need that, especially in the midst of this really complicated time we're living in.
Yeah, that's it. That is so amazing, Celia. And before I ask my last question to you, I want to ask you, how do you make distinction between inner being and interbeing?
So by inner being, I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Inner being, I can spell that INNER, inner, and inter, INTER.
Mm-hmm.
So what is interbeing? What is the concept of interbeing?
Interbeing is, so I think the idea of interbeing actually would encompass both of those things. So the idea of interbeing is that we are not separate in any way. And this is something Thich Nhat Hanh created this word because, so if you have the example of a flower and you think the flower is a total separate thing, but if you take the sunshine out of the flower doesn't exist. If you take the water, the rain, if you take the earth, if you take the time out of a flower, the time it takes for the flower to grow, you don't have a flower. So we see that nothing exists separately, that everything is created through this vast network of interconnection, and that we're no different than that. That if I didn't have two parents, if I didn't have the sun that nourishes the plants that I eat, I wouldn't be here. If I didn't have this oxygen, that we see how delicate, and I think right now with this coronavirus, we absolutely see interbeing in a whole different way, how connected we are. And we also see this longing for community. I'm so touched by, recently, I just saw these videos from Italy of people singing, people who are all in social isolation, but they're singing out their windows to each other to support each other. And it's so moving to see this interconnectedness. And our inner being, how I am right now, supports my availability to see my connection to others too. So I really think they as Thich Nhat Hanh, another Thich Nhat Hanh word, they inter-are with each other.
How do you spell that?
INTER-ARE.
Inter-are.
Yeah. We inter-are because you and I, we're not the same people as when we first started speaking to each other. Things have changed. We've changed. So we co-create our experience together. We're in it together, which is really beautiful. And it's like, instead of saying like, oh, I have to show up and do a good job, it's like, I have to be available to be with someone. Oh, I have an opportunity to really see somebody else and to respond. I mean, that's such a different idea than performance, right?
Yeah. And we are in this present moment awareness, like Thich Nhat Hanh says. And it's present moment awareness. And this is a wonderful moment. And thank you for explaining for that, Celia. And my last question to you is, what is the impact you want to have on this world?
So I visit my intention a lot to keep myself clear. And my intention is to really let people know their own goodness, to especially for those who have lost the idea that they matter and that they're of any value, to let them see that there is this purity in all of us. There's this absolute holiness that can't be changed by anything we've done. So showing up for others in that way, and also being a presence of care for myself and others at every moment. So that means, whatever's going on, looking at it with the eyes of compassion and really wanting to send that message of love. So that's kind of a big job. And I need to nourish a lot of joy and friendship. And it can be very challenging. The population I work with, the teens I work with, can be really challenging sometimes because they are so deep in their own despair and depression. So doing it, we touched on the non-attachment piece before, doing it without any striving, without any pushing, and just letting it fall like rain, just keeping myself as clear as possible about that it is not about me. That it's not my agenda. This is happening in their time. So that's a rather long answer to your
Well, the impact is always longer and bigger. And thank you so much for being on the show, Celia, and I'm truly honored.
Thank you. It was so lovely to connect with you, and it really nourished it nourished that need for support and for the need to listen and to be listened to. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast with Celia Landman. You can find her work at https://buddhistwriting.wordpress.com. If you have enjoyed listening to my podcast, please subscribe to the new podcast updates at my website, https://nishantgarg.me. And please provide your reviews on iTunes, which will really help me. So thank you again.